Hello, Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I am here co-hosting episode 27 of Canada and Palestine, The War on Zionism, with Laith Marouf of Free Palestine TV. Laith, as always, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Aidan.
All right, Laith. Well, normally we have a little bit more energy to start an episode, but it's been quite rough, to put it lightly. Couple of weeks since we recorded the last episode. So we have to get into it right away. First of all, what are the people of Syria going through now under this Wahhabi HTS regime? And as well, what impact is this going to have on axis of resistance, operations against the Zionist regime?
I think there's a few things that our viewers need to know. Number one, that 60% of the population of Syria is Sunni, but of the Sufi, meaning mystic sects. That's the majority, basically, of Muslims in Syria are not Wahhabi and don't even belong to any Orthodox sects of Islam, but the Sufi mystic Islam. And the, uh, another 30-40% of the population is Christian, Alawi, Shia, Druze. So the Wahhabi cult that is now in charge of Syria does not represent not any significant part of the population's religious convictions. And we see that now playing out in the streets with this genocide being conducted against not only the Christians and Alawites and Shia, but also even the vast majority of the religious preachers of the Sufi sect that is the majority of the population. We've seen, obviously, many have seen already the videos of the destruction and the of the one of the founders of the Alawite sects grave and in Aleppo. It's like 1,000-year-old grave, and the Wahhabis digging out his body and disposing of his remains. But not many have seen the videos every day of these Wahhabi death squads going into the mosques in Aleppo and in Damascus and lynching the Sunni Sufi preachers there and taking over the mosques. So this is being conducted, this mass ethnic cleansing and a demographic change. This is coupled with the occupation in South Syria that is expanding by the Zionists, where the Zionist forces have expelled close to or a little bit more than 100,000 Syrians from the 50 somewhat villages that they're now occupying in the south of Syria. And at the same time, the destruction of the National Registry and the Foreign Affairs Department and Immigration ministries that held all the record of who is Syrian or not. This is coupled with the new Wahhabi government saying that it will give citizenship to the Mongol Turkic hordes that occupied Syria, the tens of thousands of citizens of Central Asian countries and other countries around the world that came with these hordes, and Turkey announcing that it will be the one issuing citizenship cards starting from today. It's not even the government in Damascus that will be issuing these cards. They'll be issued in Turkey. And so we're seeing a mass demographic change campaign coupled with out and out genocide and expulsion. There's even now threats of withdrawing the citizenship of 500,000 Armenian Syrians that came here during the Armenian genocide. Look at what's happening in Syria. This is all happening, of course, while there's practically zero uh, news coverage on all the things that I'm talking about in the West, which shows you that currently the life of a Syrian is even less worth than the life of a Palestinian. I mean, at least there's some coverage of the genocide happening in the West of Palestine. So now we have, after normalizing of the genocide in Gaza and then normalizing of terrorism, uh, mass terrorism attack with the pager attacks in Lebanon, and then now we see full normalization of demographic change projects that we haven't seen the likes of since World War One and the mass population transfers that happened during the two world wars. This is what we're seeing now, and it's totally normal. Nobody's even talking about it.
Right, like so. Well, there's more things I could talk about there. First of all, I do want to ask in terms of the Golan Heights, despite what Israel says, still occupied Golan Heights. We have a situation of an open pursuit of greater Israel. So maybe you could talk to people a little bit about that, but also I think people might not have thought about what are the ramifications for the Palestinian resistance. Is there any chance this may end up spreading Israeli forces farther than they can handle? Or is that an optimist's view?
Well, look, this is the hopes is that the more spread out the Israeli forces are, the easier they are of as a target if there is a actual resistance on the ground inside Syria. And we see already the kind of the first implications of that coming out. Today there was a statement from the resistance, new resistance forces in Syria, and they're using the colors of the national flag, not the colonialist flag that the Wahhabi death squads now have instituted. And they're going to be resisting both the Wahhabi death squads and the Israeli occupation. They talk about Zionism, they talk about imperialism, they talk about the Wahhabis all in these statements. So it's a good indication the kind of language that they're using of their political positionality. So there's already obviously armed groups all across the country that have been formed over the last 2 weeks that are regional based, neighborhood based, village based, whatever it is, all these self-defense units that have popped up because of the marauding hordes that are going village to village and looting and lynching and killing whatever they feel like doing. So now we have kind of a nascent beginnings of what could become a national liberation front forming through these out and out groups that are saying they're resistance groups, and through the formation of these local protection units that could eventually merge with such a national military opposition to the occupation. And so I see hope. It's been 100 years. The Palestinians and greater Syria region has been resisting imperialism and Western colonialism at great odds. And the people of the regions have lived huge catastrophes and setbacks over this century. And never have they given up under those conditions. So today, when we were closer than ever to the liberation of Palestine a year ago, before those terrorist pager attacks and the mass campaign of assassination of leadership of the resistance, even with the setbacks that we live today, we are still closer to the liberation of Palestine than any day before in this 100-year war. So I don't think the people of the region and or the resistance uh, will stop and or be demoralized to a point of surrendering. And what's coming in the next 2 months, or at least even the month from now till the election of Trump, I can maybe prepare everybody that it's going to be worse than what we've seen yet. And with the coming of Trump, things are going to get even worse. And this war is just in its beginning. The war for the liberation of Palestine is just like any other decolonization war, is not a short event. You cannot decolonize Algeria after 100 years of occupation without a war of 5, 6 years. Similarly for Vietnam, and now we're talking about Palestine, the most entrenched imperialist position in the world and the jewel in the crown of imperialism. The war for the liberation of Palestine will be nothing shorter than that, and the costs are going to be heavy for the people of the region, but also it will be a very heavy cost for the empire once this war is fought directly without any, camouflage. Up until now, the empire is hiding behind the Zionist colony doing its actions. It's pretending that Israel is the one conducting 600 or 6,000 air raids over Lebanon, something that the Israelis don't have enough air force for that. So it's clear that the West is fighting this war, but up until now, pretending that it's Israel. Once Trump comes into power, we will be in the direct war stage, and everybody in the West should be ready for the costs of this war that they're going to have to pay.
Right. So with that coming up, potentially, I mean, obviously we've seen Ansar Allah continue their righteous fight. They've really taken it. They were launching a series of strikes on Tel Aviv. They're dealing with some of their own challenges because, again, really it's the US by their Gulf proxies. There was an attempted counteroffensive that occurred against the Ansar Allah government. It's not clear how exactly successful that's been. It doesn't seem like it's been too successful. They've been able to build an entire state to their great credit. But if we're looking at the basis of forces in the region, I guess my concern would be how much of a role, if we get into an open war, do you think Iran would be willing to play? Because I think Iran is the key to everything in terms of if there's going to be an open war, because it supported Hezbollah, it supported Ansar Allah, it supported many of these regional players to its great credit. But we're also seeing talks and pushes for, say, another JCPOA, another deal, right? And I'll say to try to be a tiny bit fair is that if you look at the Vietnamese resistance and you look at Ho Chi Minh, they did have to sign deals with the imperial powers to buy time at certain points. But it was also a point in history where you could actually get them to back off for a bit of time. So I've seen that comparison, and I want to address why I don't really believe in it personally. But anyways, like I want to get your thoughts on it. If we get to a full war, do you think Iran will step up fully militarily, or do you think it'll try to stay out in view of getting a deal with the Americans?
Yeah, the thing is that the Zionists have smelled blood, okay, and they have they feel that they can actually beat the whole world if they want to. And nobody will stop them, neither militarily and or politically. So even if Iran wants to try to negotiate with the West, Netanyahu and Trump will not be the ones allowing that to happen. They really want to occupy all the Arabic world and enslave the Muslim peoples, including Iran, openly. They want to rape and pillage unhindered out in the open. They want to live the glories of the 15 and 1600s of mass extinctions of nations in the Americas uh, while cannibalizing and mass raping people and looting their resources. They are so emboldened now because they've been doing it right now for 15 months in Palestine, openly, raping, pillaging, mass murder, mass loot, whatever. Nothing's stopping them. So why would, even if some stupid leadership in Iran makes the mistake to think that it can negotiate with the Zionists, why, or, the Americans, which are the Zionists, why would Americans, give them anything? I mean, the Americans just saw Russia barter away Syria and betray the whole axis of resistance in return for Ukraine, number one. Number two, by the way, Al-Jolani, the Wahhabi Saudi new ruler of Damascus, said today that he wants the Russians to stay and he will guarantee the safety of their bases. So it's clear that they have made a deal, the Russians, on this ground. So in this situation, the Americans see that the Iran and the axis of resistance as a whole is alone in this world. The Russians and Chinese may pay platitudes to Palestinian liberation, may use the out and out genocide and destruction of Palestinian and Syrian and Lebanese societies at the hands of the West as a uh, propaganda tool to compare to what's happening in Ukraine or what's happening in Taiwan or whatever it is to play this propaganda game with the West. But that's it. So uh, no, there will be a war, no matter what Iran wants. Okay. Because the Zionists see that they can go ahead and do this. So ultimately, we're heading to war. There's nothing to stop it.
All right, like so one last thing I want to mention on Syria is I think I haven't seen it discussed yet, right? But when you have the citizenship going to these Wahhabi fighters, don't you think that frankly poses a significant danger to anti-imperialists around the world, right? I mean, are you on the same page as me there? Because I'm looking at that with very deep concern. For example, the anti-imperial governments don't keep a darn close look at these lists and don't be very restrictive in terms of who's let in and who's not, I mean, couldn't Syria become a operations hotspot for assassinations and targeting, I mean, around the world, right? Am I wrong to feel that that's a real risk now?
Yeah, I mean it's a real risk, but remember that number one, there's you know there's not enough of them to run a country. This is why it's actually the US and Turkey and Israel that are running the country now. Okay, this is why the citizenship procedures and official documents and so on are now going to be printed in Turkey, issued from Turkey, because there's no such there was something like 70,000 fighters left out of the hordes that were sent to Syria. And so you can't run a government with 70,000 militias. No, you can't. They don't even know how to run an office. These are like grunts on the ground. So maybe they can be a police force, but or a part of an army, but they can't be a government. So the other thing is that although the empire has captured Syria right now, it will never allow Syria to flourish in any shape or form. They will not going to give visas to Syrians suddenly. That's never going to happen. Syrians are still going to be abused and excluded from international life. And still, the Caesars Act is continuing to 2029. By the way, we were just told that Al-Julani will be allowed to rule Syria for another 4 years. There will be no election in Syria for 4 years. This is what the West is allowing right now. I mean, democracy is a great thing. Uh, and one last thing I would say is that, you know, what we just saw happen in Syria and what happened over the last, 10 years with the rise of New Russia, for anybody who's leftist, they have to analyze it in this way. And I know I'm straying away from your question here. Uh, Before World War One, Russia, Imperial Russia, was vying to join the civilized white race. Okay. And its battle was with who is, there was this internal battle in this whiteness of who is the most superior, the Germanics, the Latins, meaning the French and Italians, Spanish and Portuguese, and or the Slavics. And lucky for the rest of humanity, the Soviet revolution happened and it broke that consensus that was being built. The Russian imperial family was intermarried into the Prussians and the Germans into the English and the English into the Greeks. And, all of those royal families were intermarried. And the normal path was the conglomeration of this into a blob of whiteness. And the Soviet Revolution saved humanity because it broke that consensus of whiteness for a while. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the return of the new Russia that asserts itself right now under Putin as the true savior of Christian Western civilization. Its competition right now with the Germanics, the Anglo-Germanics, meaning, the Americans, Canadians, all of that, is on who truly represents this now pure whiteness, pure Christianity, or whatever they want to call it, because it's not Christianity. Christianity is ours in Palestine. For a while, it may have seemed for some who are not acute enough that this is a good thing, that Russia is reasserting this Christian whiteness and cultural revival and so forth. But because in the end, it's actually playing to the same tune of what was happening before World War One. It is definitely not a good thing for anybody who is Asian, African, or Latin American. And look at what happened. All this talk about multipolarity is now truly narrowing down to tripolarity. And Russia is willing to allow the fall of Syria, the most loyal friend of the Russian people since the Soviet Revolution, and the continuation of the genocide in Palestine and the piracy and banditry of the Zionists. Russia is allowing all of that to happen because it.
Look, personally, like I will say that my support for the Russian special military operation was always very much based on the fact that I saw it as protecting, national security for Russia, that they have a legitimate right to pursue that, and that it's a necessary thing. Their foreign policy record outside of that issue is way, way, way more mixed. Now, do I think they're as toxic as, say, the end of the Russian Empire? I don't think they're as toxic as that front because the horrors that the Tsar was putting the Russian people, well, Russian people in the occupied nations that eventually formed Soviet Union put through, they were another level. Now, that doesn't take away from the severe flaws and problems in Russia's geopolitical decision making, but I also just want to be uh, just reason try to be reasonable on it because I understand totally, Laith, that look, it stung for me, for example, very hard to see Syria go down this Bashar al-Assad led government because they've played a very positive role in the region and supporting the axis of resistance. But I also just want to be cautious. But obviously, Laith, you got your prerogative, so please do carry on. I just want to throw in my perspective.
Yeah, no, what I'm trying to say is that if you see the paradigms that Russia is putting out now about what is Russia stand for, it is addressing itself mainly not to the rest of the world, but to the Western populace. And is addressing itself as the bastion and savior of Western civilization, Christian, Judeo, whatever civilization that's imaginary. And its address is always to the issue of purity and immigration and wokeism. And you understand what I mean? All of this is addressed to that. And that plays in that context, actually reasserts Russia's want to join whiteness. Okay. And that was what was happening before the Soviet revolution. And so, this is not a good thing for the rest of the world. And as we saw, this talk about multipolarity and BRICS, actually, if you notice, all these moves, including BRICS, was not a, a push to multipolarity. It was a push to tripolarity between Russia, China, and the US, or the empire that the US controls. And that is indicated in the I and the B in BRICS, Brazil and India being the in-betweens between China and Russia and the West empire. So and the insistence on bringing in Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates while not allowing Iran or Syria to join or Venezuela, those are all indications that China and Russia are willing to co-manage the world with the Western Empire, but not allow a full rise of other poles. The logical thing in a multipolar world, and would have been, that China and Russia assists the rise of a new pole in Western Asia and the exit of American troops from there, a rise of unified Greater Syria, what have you, or beginnings of nascent Arab unification. But those projects have been fought against. China and Russia don't want it seems like, to happen. And this is what we are living right now.
I think Russia is a much more erratic player in this game because, look, Russia did want to join NATO after the fall of the Soviet Union, and Russia's hand again. Part of the reason why I support the Russian SMO is not because this reasoning is good, but look, the reasoning is very much that Russia did not want to do this. They are, to me, in terms of how they behaved towards Ukraine, it's not imperial in the slightest. They wanted other solutions. But look, their hands being forced by the belligerents of the West. So do I think out of the good, purest goodness of their heart, are they doing what they're doing? No, I don't think so. If they had the chance to reintegrate into the West, now I don't know. Now I don't know. They can talk about the Christian values, they can talk about that, but I'm not sure how much of that is propaganda towards Westerners because their trust has been broken very severely. but they will play to their own benefit. There's no doubt about that. My opinion in terms of China is pretty much that they are insistent to an absolute degree on non-interference. And now the consequences of that, sometimes they can be very damaging for other countries in this world. Do I think multipolarity itself is dead? I don't know about that. I think there's more time needed before we can say it's conclusively dead because the serious situation is a great damaging tragedy in this world. But also the empire's collapse is coming. And so I don't think either one of us think that multipolarity, 70, 80, 100 years down the line is going to last because I think we both know how politics work, how resource interests work, and imperialism works more broadly. I don't think multipolarity will last forever. But do I think it's dead yet? I might differ with you a little bit there. I would give it a few more years. And if it truly can't, then it truly can't. China, again, I just think it's absolutely insistent on non-interference. It's focused on its internal development, and for better or for worse, that's where it is, rather than wanting to co-manage the world, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, look, China definitely is more less implicated in those what just happened, but more so because of its non-interference. Um, but look, there was an experiment at a similar multipolarity during what we would call an unaligned movement, the Third World Movement, that was led by Jamal Abdel Nasser, Nero, Sukarno, Tito, and such. And the Soviet Union fought that group. China didn't and joined it, but in the end, also because of its non-interference, in the end, uh, the non-aligned movement collapsed, and much of the leadership of that age were killed. Today, you cannot have multipolarity without a rise of other poles. You can't. And as long as the only rising other powers are actually vassals, colonies, and or protectorates of the West, it doesn't matter if in India becomes more industrialized. Well, it's still an American puppet. So what kind of multipolarity are we seeing coming out? No, I see it as a tripolarity currently. And the only way multipolarity could rise if there something like Iran rises to a stage where it's untouchable. Currently, it is still touchable, and it wasn't able to strengthen the axis of resistance to a point where it's a permanent reality. Why? Because it did not occupy and change demographics and change borders as the Americans are doing. The Americans are doing permanency in their moves in their colonial holdings, uh, culling the population of Greater Syria for the last 100 years, while allowing the desert regions in the Arabian Peninsula to overpopulate. I mean, traditionally, 1/3 of the population of the Arabic world is in the Greater Syria region. Now it's us over 100 years of expulsions and genocides and changing borders and so on. Now there's 30 somewhat million people in Saudi kingdom, while there's only 18 million in Syria, which should be actually at 60 or 80 million now, the population, if the cullings didn't happen over the last 100 years.
All right, so we'll leave that discussion there, but we should talk about the Zionist proxy Palestinian Authority. Now there was a series of raids, I believe, on December 14th. So can you talk to us about that raid, about how Palestinian Authority has been working to crack down on Palestinian resistance? and about Canadian training to the PA forces. I believe it was Operation Proteus that this goes through. Can you talk about this, please?
Yeah, I mean, the attacks on Jenin and Jenin refugee camp are ongoing. Uh, Yesterday or the day before, there was a Palestinian Authority sniper that shot a journalist, a young female journalist, as she was coming out of her neighbor's home carrying a child, shot her straight in the head, assassination style, in Jenin. And so the journalists in the West Bank are right now under threat from the Palestinian Authority as much as they are under threat from the Israeli occupation forces. And I would say, since in the last 6 months, uh, four of our journalists as Free Palestine TV in the West Bank were either detained and or held with no charges for a day. And so we're worried about the situation of all the people in the West Bank under these conditions, but also the journalists. There was statements coming out from the PA, for instance, condemning the Al Jazeera for interviewing the mother of this young journalist that got killed 2 days ago. And the Palestinian Authority just banned Al Jazeera in the West Bank. And so we're worried about also our position as Free Palestine TV, what could happen to us and our journalists. The other thing that I would say is that, this right now, all the tools of the empire that were quiet during the genocide feel emboldened that they can go now on the offensive openly, collaborate openly. At the beginnings of the genocide in October 2023, I remember, and this is something again shows you how things are very related. There was an event here in Beirut with the leadership representation of the different Palestinian factions. We live broadcasted it, and at the time, I asked the representative of Fatah in Lebanon, where are the security forces of the Palestinian Authority? It was a rhetorical question, meaning where are they in terms of defending the Palestinians? And his security uh, guards pulled their guns on me live on television there, threatened us as free FPTV, called us collaboration traders or whatever it is, troublemakers. And then they raided our offices and destroyed them. In November 2023, we lost our studios in Beirut because of that. And at the time, I'm talking to all the Palestinian leadership here in Lebanon. I said you know, they need to take out Fatah. They need to take out Mahmoud Abbas. This is the moment of a revolution that collaborators should be dealt with immediately because they will be harming the resistance and plotting for the fall of the resistance, and they will be ready with their knives once the resistance is weaker. And of course, we're now a year and 15 months later, it's clear now that that was a correct assessment. And I would say what we saw happening in Syria is the same situation. The Syrian government and the resistance in Syria should have dealt with these Wahhabi squads when they had the upper hand. And I fear now in Lebanon that all the collaborationists that participated in many genocides before on behalf of the West are getting themselves ready to also attack the resistance here in Lebanon.
I think what the and I've come to terms with this over time myself, and I think you're probably on the same page, Laith, is that the resistance and this liberation, the battle against colonialism, I think we're in an era where there might be some covert support, some overt support. But these battles are really going to depend on in the anti-colonial states, the national peoples, and in the colonial states, it's going to depend on the peoples within those states to create that change. I don't think we're in an era where we're going to see the West constantly intervene. We are, but I don't think right now the other powers are going to intervene in that way. It's going to be for, in a very ugly way to say it, it's going to be the people that determine the future. And unfortunately, that is going to mean it's going to mean a heavier price that's going to be paid by people that are fighting for liberation and those that are fighting against the actions of colonial regimes. I don't know what to say. It's not a fun thing to say, but
Yeah, about Canada, look, for 20 years, I tried to organize in Canada to get people to demonstrate outside the Palestinian Authority embassy, quote unquote. And that should have been done 20 years ago when Mahmoud Abbas
this
collaborated
is the
with the
thing. I've seen this.
Israelis against the
I've seen the
government.
friendly rhetoric towards the PA. I've seen people like where the PA ambassador of sorts will have friendly events on the Canada Palestine front. That's always
They
mystified.
should be pied when they
But
appear
that's
at
always It's
events.
always mystified me why there's been that friendliness. It's a collaborator force. It's
And
always
so the
baffled me.
Palestinian diaspora in the West need to, instead of demonstrating at Israeli embassies, first and foremost, occupy and liberate the Palestinian Authority diplomatic offices around the world and form a government in exile without the uh, you know um, uh, participation of the collaborators within the Palestinian Authority. If the Palestinians in diaspora don't have the courage to take out the collaborators amongst them in such unarmed ways, it's very easy to occupy the embassy and to take it over and to expel the collaborators and appoint true representatives of the communities in diaspora.
I mean, I think there's a reality, and it's something that I've seen in terms of the reporting I've done. And I mean, like, you've been at this for way longer, so you will have seen this even more. Is I've seen diasporas be talked about very uncritically. And now, look, I want to speak honestly. Look, I'm a white dude, so I'm a little cautious about speaking too harshly or unfairly. But I think you have to speak within reason. And within reason, we've seen a general, the Imperial State of Canada has been working to build collaborators within diaspora communities, and you see that dominant. You see that in the Chinese community, you see that in the Russian community, you see that in the Ukrainian community, where they annihilated the socialist groupings and forcibly developed a right-wing fascist at the initiative of the government, right? So I want to bring that in with context, but I guess where you've talked about challenging the Palestinian Authority and its embassy and so forth. But I mean, let's just talk about the Palestine diaspora specifically. How do they break themselves from this collaborator kind of like role that they've kind of been brought into, that they've been pushed into? How do they break themselves out of that? Because I think that's a decisive factor right now, because we still see a servitude towards the liberal anti-Zionist Jews, like the IJV and so forth. We still see a pretty heavy servitude towards that, or friendliness towards that from the Palestine movement that I think is totally unwarranted. So how do we see the Palestinian diaspora break from this kind of collaborator role that they've been, pushed into?
Yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't matter for us to talk about the minutiae of organizing. What matters at this point is that there is no leadership that is revolutionary. I believe in the human factor importance in any revolutionary movement. The loss of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, what we may say is, is one man. It is one man, but it is a huge man that a nation like the Arabic nation births one of like that a century. Okay, any nation can barely produce somebody like that once a century. So currently, all the those who are involved in organizing in Palestinian circles in, let's say, Canada, are liberal. There's no revolutionaries yet. I can't organize from here something. Those people that organized with me 20 somewhat years ago were revolutionary. They didn't have money, they didn't have backing, they didn't have a community behind them, but their actions were revolutionary to echo through time and space. Everything that we've done, and that's a human factor. Those After those individuals left, the situation collapsed. Not because there was no attempts at institutionalizing, there was, but the odds were too huge against. But in the end, once there's no human factor that is ready for those actions, it doesn't exist, a revolutionary fever.
Well, as always, I think the CANFOL's audience, as always, really appreciates your insights and analysis. I think this is a good point to leave off the episode. So, to the CANFOL's audience, thank you for making it all the way to the 27th episode of Canada and Palestine, the War and Zionism's End. Laith, as always, thank you for co-hosting this show with me.
Good to be with you, Aidan. See you soon.
Yes, indeed. To you as well. And so, CANFL's audience, if you appreciate the journalism and analysis done, please go financially support both the Canada Files and Free Palestine TV, both doing valuable work, valuable journalism that really could benefit from more financial resources. So thank you, everyone. And that's it for the show. Goodbye. Take care, folks. We will see you next time.